What lengths can a woman go to for revenge? I am Beatrix, codename Black Mamba. I was once a member of the Deadly Viper assassination squad, and also Bill's lover. One day, I found myself pregnant, and the thought of becoming a mother made me decide to leave this life behind. I faked my own death and escaped to a small town where it seemed like a new chapter of my life had begun. But fate never allowed me a moment of peace. On my wedding day, Bill, along with his 4 assassins, stormed into my church. The Whitechapel seemed so small, as if it were telling me that even God couldn't stop their arrival. Bill shot me in the head, but to my surprise, that bullet didn't end my life. 4 years later, I woke up. Still alive. But I had lost my child. I had no time to grieve because I knew they were still waiting for me to exact my revenge. I knew that if I wanted revenge, I had to first obtain a weapon worthy of me. And this weapon could only be forged by one person, Hattori Hanzo. Okinawa, Japan, his hometown, was the only place I could find him. In this world of assassins, there are only 2 types of swords. One is Hanzo's sword. The other is unworthy of mention, but he had retired and no longer forged blades for anyone. Knowing that I was out for justice, Hanzo agreed to forge one for me. A month later, the sword was finally completed. It was the finest blade Hanzo had ever made, and as I gripped its edge, I could feel an indescribable power. This was more than just a sword, it was the weapon carrying my vow of vengeance. I knew this moment would eventually come. I stood in the shadows of this bar, my eyes locked onto the woman, O-Ren Ishii. She led the Crazy 88s, a gang filled with violence and ambition. Her lawyer Sophie, her right-hand woman Gogo, and the formidable Johnny were all not to be underestimated. She and her men sat in the bar laughing, but I knew that this storm was inevitable. I approached silently and began the battle without a sound. A single, precise strike severed Sophie's arm. She didn't even react as her arm was torn apart by the spray of blood. All eyes immediately focused on me as the battle began. First, Gogo moved. She stood up and pulled out her seemingly ordinary ball weapon. At first glance, it seemed clumsy, but in her hands, it was lethal. Her attack knocked my sword out of my hands, but she wasn't done. The ball transformed, and the chain of her weapon wrapped around my body, nearly immobilizing me. The air was thick with blood, but I felt no fear. With a sudden burst of strength, I broke free from the chain, blood spilling onto the floor, and the scent of death filled the air. Johnny, along with his men, barged in, and the battle became even more intense. With Hanzo's legendary sword in my hands, my strikes were swift and precise. Johnny's men fell one by one, like grass being mowed down, blood flying and bodies piling up. But Johnny didn't retreat. He charged at me, and we fought atop the bar's railing. Each strike was filled with power. Johnny's attacks were fierce, but not as strong as they appeared. I waited for the right moment and severed both his legs with a single stroke. He collapsed to the ground, unable to rise again. I took a deep breath and stood still for a moment before turning to face the only remaining target, O-Ren. She stood in the snow, waiting for me, her face expressionless, cold, and resolute. Snowflakes fell, and the world was silent. Our figures intertwined in the white snow as the battle was about to begin. In the clash of blades, I could feel her strength. Every move was lightning fast. But I didn't stop. My only thought was that she had to die. Finally, I thrust my sword with all my might, slicing through her skull. She collapsed in the snow, her blood staining the white ground, and my first target was complete. The next target was the second name on my list, Vernita. She was a mother now, living what seemed like a normal life. When I entered, I saw a flicker of joy in her eyes, as though her daughter had returned. She was clearly unprepared, but her skills had not dulled with age. We fought fiercely, our movements fast and precise, each clash thick with tension. Just as the atmosphere reached its peak, a sound from the door interrupted our standoff. Vernita's daughter had come home. Vernita's eyes softened instantly, filled with concern and reluctance for her daughter. In that moment, I saw a flash of pleading in her gaze. She didn't want to make any extreme moves in front of her child. As a mother, I understood her feelings, so I sheathed my blade. There was a brief ceasefire, and Vernita tried to negotiate, thinking that if we stopped, everything could start anew. But how could I agree? The hatred between us could not be undone with a few words of reconciliation. No sooner had she finished speaking than Vernita attempted a surprise attack, shooting at me without warning. But my throwing knife hit her wrist, causing her gun to drop to the floor, blood staining her clothes. At that moment, I saw someone who should not have witnessed any of this. Her daughter, standing at the door, her eyes filled with fear as she watched the scene unfold. I couldn't bring myself to kill the child. She was too young to carry this blood debt. The next target was Bud. He was one of the original 4 assassins, but had retired, even selling the Hanzo sword Bill had given him years ago. After work, he returned to his old dilapidated trailer as usual, and I hid beneath it. Rose, quietly, moving with stealth. Bud didn't seem to notice my presence as his singing came from inside the trailer, but I was wrong. Bud had been prepared. The sound of a gunshot rang out the moment I opened the door, and I collapsed to the ground. Although I wore a bulletproof vest, the close-range impact left me unable to resist, the pain immobilizing me. I struggled on the ground, helpless. Bud didn't hurry to finish me off. Instead, he picked up his phone and called Elle. I couldn't hear the conversation clearly, but I guessed that the Hanzo sword in Bud's possession was the weapon Elle had longed for.
How much?
With $1 million in folding cash.
Bud's voice was cold as he spoke about the deal, quoting a price of $1 million and arranging the delivery for the next morning. Ella showed no mercy toward me, even instructing Bud to torture me before I died, and Bud agreed eagerly. When I woke again, I realized my arms and legs were bound, and I was lying on something cold and hard. Looking down, I saw an open grave. Bud intended to bury me alive. My heart sank. In this dire situation, I had 2 choices: die now, or be buried alive and wait for death. Bud even handed me a flashlight, letting me experience the darkness that would precede my demise. The world around me became pitch black. The scent of earth filled the air. I could hear my own labored breaths mingling with the heavy sounds of dirt. My heartbeat quickened, and my consciousness began to fade, memories flooding my mind. I remembered the days when Bill and I went to China. We were close then, and he told me a story.
So in your case?
About Bai Mei, the white brow master, a martial arts legend known for his 5 fingers, piercing heart palm. Bill had once been his disciple, though he never mastered the technique. He brought me to China to learn from Bai Mei. But Bai Mei was proud and harsh, and I was often reprimanded or even beaten for the slightest mistake. Still, Bai Mei taught me some real martial arts, including the technique of inch power. It was this skill that allowed me to find a glimmer hope in my desperate situation. With all my strength, I managed to untie the ropes binding my hands and feet and retrieve the small knife hidden in my shoe. After much effort, my fingers were bloodied, but I succeeded. Then, using inch power, I began to break through the coffin's walls, little by little. I don't know how long it took, but my fingers were swollen, raw, and bloodied, yet I didn't stop. Finally, I succeeded. With a powerful swing of my arm, I ripped open a corner of the coffin. I emerged from the earth, breathing fresh air, feeling a long-lost sense of freedom. The next day, Elle arrived as planned. He brought the $1 million, and Bud got his coveted Hanzo sword. I stood at the mountaintop, awaiting his arrival. Bud looked smug, but he didn't realize that among the pile of money lay Black Mamba. The snake struck, sinking its fangs into Bud's leg. Before long, Bud collapsed, never to move again. Now, it was finally time for me to take my revenge. I lunged at Ellie, delivering a powerful kick that sent him flying. El tried to draw his blade, but I always pushed it back. Eventually, he let go and began to go back for his sword. That's when I saw it, the Hanzo sword in Bud's closet. He never sold it after all. After a fierce battle, I finally plucked out Ella's other eye and crushed it beneath my foot. The end of my revenge was always going to be the showdown with Bill. I knew I couldn't stop. No matter what the conspiracy was, I had to go to him and end it all. But when I finally stood in front of Bill, something unexpected happened. My daughter was still alive. She stood there, her eyes filled with confusion, as if asking what a mother who had lived in darkness could give her. Revenge or family. In that moment, I couldn't even choose. I had sacrificed so much for vengeance, but this familiar, yet unfamiliar little girl reminded me of my past weakness and helplessness. My heart was filled with conflict, and in the end, I compromised. After lulling my daughter to sleep, I rose and walked alone toward Bill. This man had once been my teacher, once my enemy. I tried to end it while Bill was unprepared, but to my surprise, Bill had been ready. The barrel of his gun was pointed at me. He didn't pull the trigger, but told me to sit back down, as if everything had been planned. We began talking about the past, about the years I had been missing. Bill admitted he didn't want my daughter to follow the same path as me, to become an assassin. He even apologized. But apologies couldn't return what was lost. Finally, the moment of vengeance arrived. Our fight was brief and intense. No hesitation. Bill didn't expect that Bai Mei had also taught me the 5 fingers piercing heart palm. That lethal move finally overwhelmed him, and he couldn't resist. His life was coming to an end. A hint of melancholy flashed in Bill's eyes. He didn't speak, quietly walking toward his death. My revenge was finally complete. The next day, my daughter sat in front of the TV, calm as usual. And I, alone, hid in the bathroom, unsure whether to cry or laugh. My heart was in turmoil, emotions swirling with nowhere to escape. The revenge was finished, but had everything truly ended?